The trappers gathering at Fort Bridger in November 1842 couldn't stop laughing at what Jacob Reinhardt was building behind his cabin. While every experienced mountain man in the Rockies was reinforcing log structures and stockpiling firewood for the brutal winter ahead, this German immigrant was constructing what looked like a massive beehive made of snow blocks. An igloo in Wyoming territory, a white man building an Eskimo snow house 1,000 miles from any ocean, in mountains where everyone knew the only proper shelter was logs and stone. Reinhardt's lost his mind, one trapper announced to the gathered men. Building an ice house when he's got a perfectly good cabin right there. Germans don't understand American winters, another said. He probably thinks Wyoming is like the old country. Wait until real cold hits. That snow pile will be his tomb. By February 1843, Jacob Reinhardt's snow igloo maintained an interior temperature of 38 degrees when exterior temperatures dropped to 42 below zero. His family of 6 survived in comfort with minimal firewood, sleeping warm, cooking inside, living in a structure made from the very element that was killing people across the territory. 11 trappers and settlers within 30 miles of Fort Bridger froze to death that winter, every one of them in proper log cabins. Not one person sheltering in Jacob's ridiculous snow igloo suffered serious cold injury. The structure that saved the Reinhardt family wasn't traditional Inuit design. Jacob had never met an Eskimo and had only seen drawings in books. But he'd learned something during his years in the Bavarian Alps that no American trapper understood. Snow, when properly compacted and shaped, was one of nature's best insulators. And in the winter of 1842-43, that knowledge would separate survival from death in the coldest season the Rocky Mountains had seen in living memory. Jacob Reinhardt was 36 years old when he brought his family to Wyoming territory in the summer of 1842. He'd immigrated from Bavaria in 1837, spent 3 years working in Pennsylvania, then pushed west seeking land and opportunity. His wife Anna was 32. Their 4 children ranged from age 3 to 12. They were a complete family unit attempting to establish a homestead in one of the harshest environments on the American frontier. Jacob had grown up in the Bavarian Alps, in mountain villages where winter snow accumulated to depths of 10 or 15 feet. Alpine farmers had learned over centuries to work with snow rather than simply fighting it. They used snow as insulation for root cellars, piling it against exterior walls to reduce heat loss. They built snow caves for emergency shelter when caught in storms. They understood that snow, despite being frozen water, could trap air and create spaces that were dramatically warmer than the exterior environment. When Jacob filed his claim near Fort Bridger and built his required log cabin, he was already planning for a backup shelter. The cabin was adequate by frontier standards. 16 by 18 feet, log walls, stone fireplace, wooden floor raised slightly off the ground. It would keep his family alive in normal winters. But Jacob had been asking questions at Fort Bridger, talking to old-timers about Wyoming weather, and what he heard concerned him. Wyoming could deliver killing cold, winters when temperatures dropped below -40 and stayed there for weeks, blizzards that lasted days, burying structures under snowdrifts, wind that found every gap in even well-built cabins. Wood supplies could run out, chimneys could fail, fires could go out. Jacob understood that his log cabin, despite being properly built, represented a single point of failure. If anything went wrong with the cabin, his family would be in immediate danger with no backup option. He decided to build a secondary shelter using a technique he'd read about but never tried, a large-scale snow structure that could house his entire family if the cabin became uninhabitable. The concept came from descriptions he'd seen of Eskimo igloos, combined with his own alpine experience with snow construction. He knew the basic principles: compact the snow to eliminate air gaps, build with a dome shape to distribute weight, create proper ventilation, insulate the floor from ground contact. What he didn't know was how American trappers would react to a white man building an igloo. The first significant snowfall came in early November 1842, about 8 inches of heavy, wet snow, perfect for construction. Jacob began building his snow structure immediately, working methodically despite the puzzled stares of passing trappers. The location he chose was 20 feet from his log cabin, positioned to break the prevailing northwest wind. He started by stomping down a circular area about 18 feet in diameter, compacting the snow into a solid base. Then he began cutting blocks. Snow block construction requires specific snow conditions. The snow must be consolidated enough to hold together when cut, but not so icy that it won't bond to adjacent blocks. Jacob used a long knife to cut rectangular blocks approximately 18 inches long, 12 inches wide, and 8 inches deep. Each block weighed 20 to 30 pounds. The cutting process was labor-intensive. Jacob would cut the outline of a block, then carefully lever it free from the surrounding snow. The blocks needed to remain intact. A broken block was useless. He cut dozens of blocks, stacking them near his construction site. The first course of blocks formed a circle about 12 feet in diameter. Jacob laid them carefully, tilting each slightly inward to begin creating the dome shape. The second course sat on top of the first, each block positioned to overlap the joints below, creating a spiral pattern that rose gradually inward. This was when trappers started noticing what he was doing. A man named Bill Crawford was the first to comment. "Reinhardt, what in God's name are you building?" "Shelter," Jacob replied, his German accent thick. "Snow house for winter." "A snow house? You mean like the Eskimos build?" "Yeah, similar. Igloo." Crawford stared at the rising structure. "You're building an igloo here in Wyoming." "Yeah? Why would you do that? You've got a cabin right there." "Cabin is good, yeah, but snow house is backup. If cabin fails, family has second shelter." "Your cabin isn't going to fail. It's solid." "Maybe, maybe not. Snow house costs nothing, uses material everywhere, is good insurance." Crawford shook his head. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've heard. You're wasting days building an ice house when you should be cutting firewood." "I have firewood enough. This is 3, maybe 4 days' work. Then family has backup shelter. Made of snow, the stuff we're trying to keep out of our cabins. You're building a house from it." Jacob straightened from his work. "Snow is good insulator. Inside snow house, temperature stays near freezing even when outside is very cold, is warmer than you think. Snow is cold. Cold is what kills people. You're building a tomb." Jacob didn't argue further. He'd learned that Americans were confident in their methods and skeptical of foreign techniques. He simply returned to his construction. Over 4 days, the snow dome rose, course by course. Jacob worked carefully, ensuring each block was properly positioned and bonded to its neighbors. He used loose snow as mortar, packing it into gaps between blocks. The loose snow would freeze solid, creating a continuous structure. The dome shape was critical for structural integrity. Each block supported the blocks around it and above it. The inward lean meant the entire structure was self-supporting once the final blocks were placed at the top. No internal framework was needed. The snow blocks themselves, bonded together into a dome, could support enormous weight. Additional snow accumulation would only strengthen the structure. By the 3rd day, the dome was complete except for the top opening. Jacob cut a final keystone block, larger than the others, and positioned it carefully at the apex. The structure was now sealed from above, but Jacob wasn't finished. He cut a low entrance tunnel on the south side, excavating through the base blocks and extending outward about 4 feet. The tunnel entrance was deliberately small and low, requiring anyone entering to crawl. This design served multiple purposes. It kept wind from blowing directly into the interior. It created an airlock that trapped cold air in the tunnel, while warmer air stayed in the dome, and it prevented snow from drifting into the structure. Inside, Jacob created a raised platform using snow blocks, building up the floor level about 18 inches above the tunnel entrance level. This platform would be the living surface. The elevation was crucial. Cold air sinks, so the coldest air in the structure would settle at the tunnel level and flow out the entrance. The raised platform would remain in the warmer air that rose to the dome. He also cut several small ventilation holes near the dome's apex. These holes, about 2 inches in diameter, would allow air circulation and prevent carbon dioxide buildup if fires were burned inside. Proper ventilation was essential. Snow structures could be sealed enough that oxygen depletion became dangerous without adequate air exchange. The final touch was waterproofing. Jacob lit a small fire inside the igloo, allowing heat to slightly melt the interior snow surface. The melted surface refroze into a smooth, ice-like coating that sealed any remaining gaps and created a surface that reflected heat back into the interior base. This glazing technique dramatically improved the structure's thermal performance. When finished, the snow igloo was an impressive structure, 12 feet in interior diameter, about 8 feet high at the dome's center, with walls approximately 14 inches thick. The total snow mass was several tons. From outside, it looked like a white mound with a small dark entrance tunnel. The trappers who saw the completed structure thought it was the strangest thing built in Wyoming territory. Word spread to Fort Bridger. Men rode out specifically to see Reinhardt's ice castle. The mockery intensified. "You planning to live in that thing?" one trapper asked. "If necessary, Ja. It's made of snow. Snow melts, not when temperature stays below freezing. In Wyoming winter will not melt. What about your fire? You light a fire inside, the whole thing will collapse. Small fire is fine. Snow is good insulator, does not melt easily from small heat source. I give it 2 weeks before it caves in and buries you." Jacob ignored the predictions. He'd built the structure using sound principles. It would work. He was confident of that, but he also hoped he wouldn't need to use it. The igloo was backup shelter, not primary housing. If the cabin remained functional all winter, the igloo would sit unused, and the trappers could mock him all they wanted. The first serious cold came in mid-December. Temperature dropped to 20 below zero overnight. Jacob's cabin handled it adequately, though he was burning significant firewood to maintain interior temperature around 45 degrees. This was tolerable, but not comfortable. Out of curiosity, Jacob checked the interior temperature of his snow igloo. He'd placed a thermometer inside when the structure was completed, suspending it from the dome ceiling at the height of the raised platform. The interior temperature was 32 degrees, exactly at freezing. Despite exterior temperature of 20 below, the igloo's interior was 52 degrees warmer than outside, and this was without any heat source inside. The temperature was entirely due to the insulating properties of the snow structure itself. Jacob did the calculation. His cabin, with its log walls and fireplace burning steadily, maintained interior temperature about 65 degrees warmer than exterior. The igloo, with no heat source at all, was maintaining a 52-degree differential. The insulating efficiency per unit of heat input was dramatically better in the snow structure. He mentioned this to Bill Crawford when they met at Fort Bridger. Crawford was skeptical. "You're saying your snow house is warmer than your cabin?" "No, cabin is warmer, but igloo maintains good temperature with no fire. Cabin requires constant fire. If calculate efficiency, igloo is better. But 32 degrees isn't warm. That's freezing. Is 52 degrees warmer than outside? Inside igloo you do not feel wind. Air is still. With sleeping furs and small heat source, would be comfortable. I still think it's ridiculous, but I'll admit I'm curious to see if it lasts the winter." It lasted. Through December and into January, as snow accumulated around Fort Bridger, Jacob's igloo sat solid and unchanged. Additional snowfall only added to its insulation. The structure that trappers had predicted would collapse within weeks showed no signs of deterioration. The true test came in late January 1843. A series of blizzards hit Wyoming territory, each worse than the last. Temperature plummeted. By January 24th, the thermometer at Fort Bridger read 38 below zero. By January 27th, it had dropped to 42 below zero, the coldest temperature anyone at the fort could remember. Jacob's cabin was struggling. He was burning wood constantly, but the interior temperature wouldn't rise above 35 degrees. The children were cold, despite multiple layers of clothing and blankets. Anna was concerned about the youngest, a 3-year-old girl who seemed increasingly lethargic, an early sign of hypothermia. Then disaster struck. On January 28th, part of Jacob's cabin chimney collapsed. Stones that had seemed solid fell during the night, partially blocking the chimney and causing smoke to back up into the cabin. Jacob could no longer maintain a fire without filling the living space with smoke. He could either freeze with no fire or suffocate with smoke. Neither option was survivable. He made the decision immediately. The family would move to the snow igloo. The trappers who learned of this decision thought Jacob was committing suicide. Moving from a log cabin to a snow structure in 40 below weather seemed insane, but Jacob understood what the trappers didn't. The igloo, despite being made of snow, would be warmer than his damaged cabin because he could safely burn a fire inside it. The ventilation holes he'd built into the dome would allow smoke to escape while retaining heat. The family gathered what they needed: sleeping furs, blankets, food supplies, cooking equipment, and firewood. Jacob made multiple trips through the bitter cold, carrying supplies from cabin to igloo. The entrance tunnel was nearly blocked by drifted snow, but he cleared it and began moving his family inside. Anna was terrified. "We'll freeze in there." "No," Jacob assured her. Inside is warmer than cabin now, trust me. They crawled through the entrance tunnel one by one, emerging into the dome interior. Jacob had already placed sleeping furs on the raised snow platform. He lit a small fire in a shallow depression he'd carved into the platform, using a metal basin to contain the coals and protect the snow from direct contact with flames. The change was immediate and dramatic. Within 30 minutes, the interior temperature rose from 32 degrees to 45 degrees. The small fire, burning just a few pieces of wood, heated the enclosed space efficiently. The smoke rose and escaped through the ventilation holes. The air remained breathable. More importantly, there was no wind. The thick snow walls blocked all air movement. The stillness made the temperature feel warmer than it was. The family, wrapped in furs on the raised platform, began to warm up. The youngest child, who'd been worryingly cold in the cabin, gradually returned to normal. Color came back to her face. She stopped shivering. By evening, she was talking normally and eating. They spent that first night in the igloo, all 6 of them crowded on the snow platform. The interior temperature stayed between 40 and 45 degrees all night. Jacob burned only small amounts of wood, just enough to maintain temperature. The structure retained heat with remarkable efficiency. Outside, the temperature was 42 below zero. Inside the igloo, the family slept warm under their furs, protected by walls of compacted snow. The Reinhardt family stayed in the snow igloo for 3 weeks while Jacob repaired his cabin chimney. The repair work had to be done in extreme cold and could only proceed in short sessions before he had to return inside to warm up. But the igloo provided a safe, relatively comfortable base while he worked. Word spread about what Jacob had done. The family living in a snow house, surviving comfortably in a structure made from the same material that was killing people across the territory. Because people were dying. The winter of 1842-43 was brutal beyond anything the Wyoming settlers had experienced. Cabins that seemed adequate were proving inadequate. Firewood supplies were running out. Chimneys were failing from thermal stress. Men were dying trying to cut more wood in the lethal cold. By early February, the death toll in the Fort Bridger area was mounting. A trapper named John Matthews froze to death when his cabin's fireplace cracked and became unusable. The Henderson family lost 2 children when their firewood ran out, and the father couldn't cut more in the extreme conditions. Bill Crawford's neighbor, a man named Samuel Pierce, died in his sleep when temperatures in his cabin dropped too low. In total, 11 people within 30 miles of Fort Bridger died that winter from cold-related causes. All of them died in log cabins. Not one person sheltering in Jacob's snow igloo suffered serious injury. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Crawford visited the Reinhardt family in mid-February, crawling through the entrance tunnel to see the interior for himself. What he found shocked him. The space was warm, not warm like summer, but comfortable enough that the children were playing without heavy coats. A small fire burned in the metal basin. Cooking was being done inside. The family was living normally in a structure made entirely of snow. "How is this possible?" Crawford asked. "It's 30 below outside. You're barely burning any wood, and everyone's comfortable." "Snow is very good insulator," Jacob explained. "Traps air, blocks wind. Small fire heats space efficiently because no heat escapes through walls. But it's snow. It should be cold." "Snow is cold, Ja, but snow does not conduct heat well. Like thick blanket, keeps heat inside, keeps cold outside." Crawford looked at the dome walls, the smooth, icy interior surface, the raised platform. "Your cabin, with its log walls and fireplace, couldn't keep your family warm. This thing made of frozen water is keeping you warm with a fraction of the fuel. That makes no sense. Log cabin has many gaps, much airflow. Heat escapes constantly, must burn much wood to replace heat loss. Snow house is sealed, no gaps, no airflow. Heat stays inside, is more efficient. Why doesn't everyone build these then?" "Because most people think like you think. See snow, think cold, think death. Do not understand that snow can be shaped into shelter. Is old knowledge in some places new here?" Crawford sat quietly for a moment. "I called your igloo ridiculous. I told everyone you'd freeze. I was wrong. And my wrongness almost killed me. I ran out of firewood last week. I barely made it to Fort Bridger to buy more. If I'd built a backup shelter like you did, I'd have had options." "Is not too late," Jacob said. "Snow is everywhere. Can build snow shelter in 2 days if you know how. Next winter you build one. Insurance shelter. Will you teach me?" "Yeah, of course. We'll teach anyone who wants to learn." By late February, As the worst cold began to break, Jacob was conducting workshops at Fort Bridger. He'd haul snow blocks to the fort and demonstrate construction technique to groups of trappers and settlers. He explained the principles: compact the snow, build in a dome, create proper ventilation, raise the sleeping platform, glaze the interior. Not everyone was convinced. Some trappers still insisted that log cabins were the only proper shelter, but those who'd struggled through January and February, who'd nearly run out of firewood or suffered chimney failures or simply froze in inadequate structures, paid close attention. By the fall of 1843, at least 15 families in the Fort Bridger area had built backup snow shelters following Jacob's design. When winter came again, a milder winter than 1842-43, several families used their igloos for at least part of the season. All reported the same results: surprisingly warm, remarkably efficient, comfortable with minimal fuel consumption. The technique spread through the mountain communities. By 1845, snow backup shelters were common enough that they appeared in advice guides for new settlers. Build a snow house as secondary shelter, one guide recommended. May save your life if primary shelter fails. The scientific explanation for why snow igloos worked so well wasn't fully understood at the time, but modern thermodynamics makes it clear. Snow is an excellent insulator because it's composed of ice crystals with air trapped between them. Still, air is one of nature's best insulators. A snow structure's R value, insulation effectiveness, is approximately R1 per inch, meaning Jacob's 14-inch walls had an insulation value around R14. Log cabin walls typically achieved R8 to R10. More importantly, snow structures could be built without gaps. Log cabins, even well-built ones, had chinking that cracked, joints that separated, and numerous small air infiltration points. These gaps allowed cold air in and warm air out, dramatically reducing heating efficiency. Snow blocks, bonded together and glazed, created a nearly seamless barrier. Air infiltration was minimal. The dome shape was also critical. Domes distribute weight evenly, making them structurally efficient. They also have the lowest surface area for a given interior volume, minimizing the area through which heat can escape. A dome-shaped snow shelter lost less heat per cubic foot of interior space than a rectangular log cabin of similar volume. Jacob's raised platform design addressed the cold air sink problem. Cold air is denser than warm air and settles to the lowest point. By elevating the sleeping surface and creating a lower-level entrance tunnel, Jacob ensured that the coldest air drained out of the living space. The family slept and lived in the warmest air layer. Finally, the small fire provided heat that was retained with exceptional efficiency. In a leaky log cabin, much of the fire's heat escaped through gaps and up the chimney. In the sealed snow dome, virtually all the heat stayed in the living space. A fire 1/10 the size could maintain comparable temperatures. Jacob Reinhardt proved up his homestead claim in 1847, gaining full ownership of his 160 acres. He never had to use his snow igloo again after that brutal winter of 1842-43. His repaired cabin served adequately in subsequent years. But he rebuilt the igloo every autumn as insurance, and several times allowed neighbors to shelter there during especially cold periods. The technique he introduced became part of mountain survival knowledge. Snow shelters, ranging from simple caves to elaborate igloo structures, were recognized as legitimate emergency shelter. The skepticism that had greeted Jacob's construction in 1842 gave way to acceptance and even admiration. Bill Crawford, who'd been among the harshest critics, wrote in his 1867 memoir, "I mocked Jacob Reinhardt for building a house of snow, called it the most ridiculous thing I'd seen. Then I nearly died in my solid log cabin, while his family lived comfortable in frozen water shaped into a dome. That winter taught me that sometimes foreign knowledge is superior knowledge, and sometimes the ridiculous is just the unfamiliar." The winter of 1842-43 entered Wyoming Territory law as the hard winter, or long cold. Records showed it as the coldest winter since systematic temperature recording began in the region. The 11 deaths near Fort Bridger represented a mortality rate of nearly 8% of the local population, a catastrophic toll for a single season. The Reinhardt family's survival, comfortable and safe in a structure made from snow, became a teaching story. Guides written for new settlers mentioned it specifically. Do not dismiss snow as merely an enemy. Properly shaped, snow provides better insulation than many solid materials. materials. Learn snow shelter construction as backup skill. Modern analysis confirms that Jacob's design was thermodynamically sound. Contemporary snow shelters built for recreation or emergency use follow similar principles: dome shape, raised platforms, small entrance tunnels, ventilation holes. The Inuit, who refined snow shelter construction over millennia, developed nearly identical solutions to the same problems Jacob solved through alpine experience and reading. The key insight that saved the Reinhardt family was understanding that insulation depends on thermal resistance, not on the inherent warmth of materials. Snow felt cold to the touch, but it resisted heat transfer exceptionally well. Glass felt smooth and civilized, but it conducted heat rapidly. The material that seemed like an enemy, frozen water, was actually an excellent building material when properly engineered. Jacob Reinhardt died in 1881 at age 75. His obituary in the territorial newspaper mentioned his snow igloo prominently. Mr. Reinhardt will be remembered as the German settler who introduced snow shelter construction to Wyoming, saving his family and teaching survival techniques that preserved many lives over subsequent decades. The original igloo melted in spring 1843, as all snow structures eventually do, but Jacob built a permanent monument to the concept, a stone cairn near his cabin, with a plaque explaining what had happened that winter. The cairn still stands, maintained by historical societies, with updated plaques describing the hard winter and the igloo that proved snow could save lives. The photograph taken in 1879, 2 years before Jacob's death, shows him standing next to a demonstration snow igloo he'd built for a visiting photographer. He's elderly but sturdy, posing beside the structure that everyone once called ridiculous. The photograph's caption reads, "Jacob Reinhardt with snow shelter, similar to structure that saved his family in winter of 1842-43. The technique Jacob introduced remained relevant into the 20th century. Mountain climbers, Arctic explorers, and winter survival experts all used variations of snow shelter construction. The U.S. Army trained soldiers in snow shelter building, using principles identical to those Jacob had demonstrated. The ridiculous technique became military doctrine. The final validation came from scientific study. In 1956, researchers at the University of Wyoming conducted thermal efficiency tests on various shelter types in extreme cold. They tested log cabins, canvas tents, and properly constructed snow igloos. The igloos, despite being made from frozen water, maintained interior temperatures with half the heat input required by log structures. The study confirmed what Jacob had known in 1842. Snow, properly used, was one of the best insulating materials available in winter environments. Everyone thought Jacob Reinhardt's snow igloo was ridiculous. A white man building an Eskimo shelter in Wyoming, using snow blocks to create a house while surrounded by good timber. It violated every assumption about proper construction. It seemed backwards, primitive, doomed to fail. Then the coldest winter in memory arrived, and the ridiculous became the life-saving. The igloo that was supposed to be a tomb became the warmest shelter in the territory. The structure made from frozen water protected 6 lives while 11 people froze in proper cabins. The German immigrant everyone mocked proved to understand survival better than mountain men with decades of experience. The lesson was simple but profound. Sometimes the material you're fighting against can become your greatest tool when you understand how to work with it. Snow wasn't just cold and death. It was also insulation, structure, and survival. Jacob Reinhardt understood that. The trappers who mocked him learned it the hard way, and his ridiculous snow igloo saved his family when 11 others froze to death, proving that sometimes the strangest solution is the only solution that works.